Did you know that there's a hidden system that may well be running your life and you're totally unaware of it? In our last video, we actually discovered something that many people find both surprising and strangely revealing. And that is, your results are not random, even when they feel that way. We explored the idea that what appears inconsistent on the surface is often patterned underneath. And once you begin noticing those patterns, life starts making a lot more sense. But if our results are patterned, what is actually producing the pattern? What is the hidden mechanism behind that repetition? Why do people recreate the same income level, the same emotional experiences, the same relationship dynamics, and the same cycles of motivational loss of momentum? Even when they genuinely want something better, that is what we're going to explore today. And this is where things start getting really interesting, because the hidden mechanism behind your results is not just thought, it's not just mindset in the simple motivational sense. It's the interaction between three powerful forces. And when those three things interact, well, life begins organizing itself in really predictable ways, even when we think we are making completely new choices. So, those three forces I just mentioned before the intro are identity, emotion, and familiarity. Now, before we unpack those three amazing forces that are literally controlling our lives, let me tell you about something I began noticing in my own life many years ago. There were periods when things started really improving, opportunities really started appearing, and momentum really started to build. Externally, things were actually moving forward really good, but internally, something interesting was happening. Part of me really felt just really tense, almost like I was waiting for something to go wrong. I mean, I don't know if you've ever experienced anything like that. Things start going well, and then instead of relaxing into it, part of you actually braces and you start monitoring everything. You become really, maybe even overcautious. You almost expect everything to drop. At the time, I didn't understand what that feeling actually meant. I thought, well, maybe I just needed more discipline, maybe more strategy, maybe more work. But later I realized what I was experiencing was something far deeper. I was actually encountering unfamiliar territory. And unfamiliar territory often creates real internal tension, not because it's bad, but because the paradigm system has not yet normalized it yet. This brings us to the first major idea, and that is that most people assume that they move towards what they want, but in reality, people often move towards what feels familiar. That distinction, I believe, explains so much about our human behavior, because familiar does not mean positive. Familiar simply means known, predictable, recognizable. And the paradigm system tends to trust what it recognizes, even when that familiar pattern is limiting. For example, someone can say they want peace, but if they've lived in stress for many years, calm can feel really strange to them. Someone can say they want abundance, but if they've lived with financial pressure for a long time, stability can feel really unfamiliar. This is the puzzle, because the life people consciously desire can feel emotionally unfamiliar. And in my experience, unfamiliar environments create internal resistance until they become normal. Now, this doesn't mean people don't want change. They often deeply want it. However, wanting something and feeling normal inside can be two totally different things. That gap between desire and familiarity is where the hidden mechanism really operates. Your nervous system or your paradigm is constantly scanning the environment, looking for what feels predictable, manageable, and safe. So when life begins changing, part of the system tries to restore it back to the old ways. This is why people sometimes recreate the very conditions that they say they want to escape from. Not because they're foolish, Not because they're secretly enjoying suffering, although maybe they are, I don't know, but because the nervous system or paradigm often prefers predictability over possibility. That insight alone explains many repeated life patterns that happen time and time again. Now let's connect this with identity, because identity gives the system a story. When a pattern repeats long enough, identity begins actually describing it. And identity statements are very powerful. Sometimes they are spoken openly. Things like, I'm just not good with money, or I always lose momentum, or maybe nothing works for me for long. But more often, identity statements are subtle, but once identity adopts a pattern, it becomes easier to keep reproducing it. Because identity organizes behavior, and behavior reinforces identity. Together, they form a loop. This is the hidden mechanism behind so many repeated outcomes. The nervous system or the paradigm says, this feels familiar. And identity says, this is who I am. And together, those two forces quietly recreate the same results. First one might say, someone wants financial growth. They generally desire it. But even every time their income begins increasing, an internal tension starts to appear, and they start worrying about losing it. They avoid looking at financial numbers. They spend impulsively to relieve pressure. Then later they say, money always comes and goes. From the outside, it looks random, but underneath, there's a familiar emotional relationship with money. A success example would look like, say, someone wants to grow the business, so the momentum builds, things begin working, but visibly, suddenly starts to feel uncomfortable. Responsibility starts to feel really heavy. So they delay posting, they overthink decisions, they question themselves, and momentum starts to fade. Then they say, I don't know why I always lose momentum. Again, this is not random, this is patterned. Here's another critical part of the whole mechanism around this. Your emotional reference point or your baseline influences how you actually interpret reality. If your baseline is tension, then you tend to notice problems first. And if your baseline is scarcity, then you'll notice what is missing. If your baseline is distrust, then you'll tend to expect total disappointment. Perception shapes interpretation, and interpretation shapes response, and response shapes results. So the hidden mechanism is not just producing feelings, it's shaping the lens through which you experience your life. And that's why two people can experience the exact same event and move in completely different directions afterwards. Same event, same emotional baseline, different interpretation, and a totally different future. I remember that there came a point in my own personal development journey when I stopped asking, what do I need to force? And actually started asking, what type of internal atmosphere am I actually living in? That question changed everything, because I began noticing not just what I was doing, but what tone I was carrying. Things like, was I operating from pressure, from urgency, or from fear of loss, from scarcity, or from steadiness? That awareness started to create leverage, because once you see the atmosphere, you can begin changing it. I believe that every person lives inside an inner atmosphere of sorts. That atmosphere actually influences what feels believable and what feels possible, as well as what feels sustainable. Some people have lived in urgency so long that peace feels totally unfamiliar. And some have lived in scarcity so long that receiving actually feels really uncomfortable. Some have lived in self-doubt so long that confidence feels totally exposed. This inner atmosphere quietly organizes our life. Now, let me summarize the hidden mechanism. Your life tends to organize around what your identity and nervous system or your paradigm experience as familiar. Not simply what you say you want. What feels normal? And once you see that, life stops looking random. Instead, it starts looking more structured. And once something is structured, it can be changed. Which brings us to the final question. How do you change what feels normal? How do you shift familiarity? How do you stop recreating the same results and begin building a new identity and a new emotional baseline? That is exactly what we are going to explore in the next video. So if this resonated with you, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. And if you are beginning to notice patterns in your own life, do me a huge favor and leave a comment and write, "I see the pattern." Because awareness is the first step towards the real change. Thank you for being here. This is John Williams reminding you that your vision, your beliefs, and your emotions are creating your future right now. Choose wisely, live abundantly, keep dreaming big, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.